can actually plug into parameters to control them a certain way. So in this case, we'll learn how an expression can be used to automate movement. What we'll do is go ahead and create an automatic cycle using an expression. So this is just one idea of many. Let's go ahead and get started. We'll go ahead and grab our swivel control, and what we'll do is go ahead and animate our bop by adding an expression to our z-axis. And then to kind of finish it out, we can go ahead and add some follow-through using an expression to our pitch control. So I think this will be really fun. Let's go ahead and grab the swivel control, and then from there, underneath our motion panel, we'll scroll up. We'll go ahead and expand our assigned controller rollout. What we're searching for is our 0 position Z controller. There we have it. All right, sweet. So now to assign a controller to this that will allow us to add an expression, we'd simply go ahead and choose Assign Controller with that track highlighted. Nice. At this point, we'll go ahead and search for float expression. There it is. And now we'll go ahead and click OK. So here we have it. Now, if you'd like to learn more about the expression editor, we go into it a little bit more in depth in Introduction to Rigging in 3ds Max. So you can learn some really cool things in that course. But let's just go ahead and have a look at how we can start to add some movement without keyframes. So right now, what we see is the current value of 0. So you notice that if I were to go ahead and set this to, let's say, 40, and then click on Evaluate, it's going to push that control up that much higher. So that's basically what we see there. I'll go ahead and set this back to 0. I don't like IK locking. All right, great. Now, if we want to add some movement, well, have a look. We have a few functions that we can use. At the bottom, let's go ahead and work with frames. So what we'll do is go ahead and replace that 0 with an F. Now you'll notice that when we go ahead and click Evaluate, notice no errors. And 3ds Max would let us know if there was an error in the expression. We'd get a pop-up. But since there are no errors, we can now test this out. So if I were to go ahead and hit play, you'll notice that according to our frame count, this is going to continue to move up and increase in value. How cool is that? And remember, no keyframes have been added here. Sweet. Let's go ahead and jump back to our expression editor. So what we'll do is go ahead and right-click on the controller that we assign the expression to and choose Properties. All right, now to make sure that this kind of oscillates, instead of just moving up, we'll go ahead and have it move up and down. What we'll do is go ahead and add a function before frames. The function that we'll use will be sine. If we were to go ahead and click on the function list, we can have a look at a plethora of functions that we can use here in the expression editor. And here is the function we need for sine. So we'll just go ahead and close this out. And we'll now type in sine. And then we'll go ahead and add our frames function in parentheses. That way 3ds Max knows that this function should affect the function inside of the parentheses. If we were to now go ahead and click on Evaluate and test this out, we'll notice that it's going to move very slowly, but at a certain point it'll start moving down again. Fantastic, because of course this is going in a wave pattern. So what we could do at this point is go ahead and start to edit the expression a little bit more so that it can maybe move a little bit faster. And so we also have control over the magnitude, the amount of movement that we see. So in order to do this, here's how this will work. Inside of the parentheses, right after the F function, or frames function, we'll go to multiply by, let's say, about 20 or so. Now when we do this, when we multiply or do any type of operation inside of the parentheses, this will affect the speed of the animation. Now if we'd like to affect the magnitude, we'd come outside of the parentheses, and then we can multiply by another value, let's say about 3. Let's see what that does. So now when we choose Evaluate, you'll notice that now the turret is actually going to move a little bit faster, but I think it's moving a bit too much. All right, so let's say we go ahead and drop the magnitude. So I'll just go to Properties, and then from there, let's go ahead and switch that 3 to, let's say, about 1.1. So it's just moving a little bit less. I'll now go ahead and choose Evaluate. Let's go ahead and test this out. So now when we hit play, take a look at that. There is our automatic idle. How exciting. And again, no keyframes were added. This is all driven by math. Math is awesome. Now, if you really wanted to get creative, you can create a custom attribute, and then you can go ahead and plug that into your expression so that instead of using these specific values, we could always just go ahead and use whatever value you would like. The value that you would add to the custom parameter would then influence either your speed or magnitude. So that's how things can start to get more animator friendly and really exciting. So you can learn a technique like that in our character rigging courses, like Introduction to Character Rigging, as well as Character Rigging for Production. And then please have a look at Introduction to Rigging, just so that you can have another idea as to how these expressions can be used to create some really neat functionality. Now let's go ahead and finish out the lesson by adding some follow-through to our pitch control. We'll head over to, this time, our Rotate X controller. So we'll go ahead and expand our rotation list, 0 Euler, get to the X-axis. From there, we'll go ahead and assign a float expression to this. Let's go ahead and start to type this in. Instead of using sine, we're going to use cosine. The difference between the two is sine starts at 0, and cosine starts at the apex of the curve. So by using cosine, we could basically go ahead and work with the same values that we used for our first expression, and you'll notice that we'll get follow through instantly. So watch this. Let's go ahead and type in cosine, C-O-S, and then we'll add our parentheses inside. We'll go ahead and add an F. We'll multiply by 20. Sweet, as we've done before. Let's now go ahead and move outside of the parentheses, and we'll multiply by 1.1. Let's now go ahead and choose Evaluate. Alright, so when we hit play, you'll notice that, alright, we're getting some follow through, but that's pretty extreme. Let's go ahead and drop that value some. I'll go ahead and right click and choose Properties to get back to the expression. And I'll go ahead and set this value to something really low. Let's say about 0.05. We're now going to evaluate this. Alright, I think that this might work. Let's hit play. And take a look at that. We're getting some automatic follow through and overlap, all with the help of an expression. So in this lesson, we learned how expressions can be used to automate movement. So we can help animators save some time. If there's something that they really don't need to animate, let's say if it was a fan on some type of vehicle. Well, at that point, you can go ahead and have that fan be driven by an expression to save the animator a ton of time. But then you can go ahead and create a property that will allow them to have control over that fan at a certain point in case it needs to turn off or kind of break at some point. You'd want animators to have control over that type of movement. Now, if you ever want to turn the expression off or remove it, all you have to do is go back to that controller, choose Assign Controllers, and convert this back to a Bezier float controller type. So now, no longer do we have any movement on the Z-axis, but chances are we don't want to do that. Let's go and press Ctrl-Z to undo back. Fantastic. So we've learned how to create with just a few expressions. Super cool. Now to finish this out, let's say we go ahead and add some follow-through and overlap to the cable. It looks very rigid right now. And instead of using another expression or keyframes, we can get this done very quickly and have it look very natural with the help of the spring controller. It's kind of like a dynamic effect that we can add to objects here in 3ds Max. However, it's also very robust and very intuitive. We can quickly add more effects on top of the result that we get from the spring controller by simply animating the object that the controller has been added to. Yes, we can add directly on top of the spring controller's effects with keyframes. Really neat stuff. So let's go ahead and have a look at the spring controller in action. We'll go ahead and grab the cables control, and then from there we can go ahead and jump to our motion panel, grab the position list. Keep in mind it's going to affect the entire position list. So we'll go ahead and grab the top level, and then we'll assign our spring controller to it. Let's go ahead and now choose OK. Alright, sweet. So you'll notice that the controller type has changed, and we have a few properties we can use to adjust the spring controller's behavior. What I'll do is go ahead and start to add more frames. Remember, we can do this by holding down Control-Alt and dragging with the right mouse button on our trackbar. So I might go ahead and set the end time to about 200 or so. And now we'll go ahead and start back from the beginning and hit play. So we're already seeing the results of the spring controller. There's some follow through and overlap. However, the cables still feels very rigid. I'd say we can loosen up the result a bit more. And we could start to use the mass and drag as well as the tension to do that. So as we start to adjust our mass and drag properties, that will affect the bounciness of the spring controller. So a higher mass means that this will feel very bouncy or springy. So we'll probably want to drop our mass, maybe to about 50 or so. Let's go ahead and see how this looks. We'll hit play, and already the cable's starting to feel more flexible, right? And then we can go ahead and add a bit more flexibility to it by increasing our drag. So as we decrease this, it'll feel very bouncy. If I were to go ahead and set this to, let's say, something like 0.5, again, it doesn't quite fit the cable too well. I'd say what we can do is go ahead and increase this value. Let's go ahead and set it to about 1.5. So a little bit higher than our starting value. All right, take a look at that. That feels a little bit looser. Wonderful. And now to take this a step further, to add some final polish, we can go ahead and use our tension property to have this really feel very flexible and create a type of behavior that would resemble that of a rubber material. So the tension here, we can go ahead and start to decrease that to loosen this up a little bit more. Now keep in mind, as you start to adjust this value, you might consider adjusting your dampening value as well. So as you start to increase your tension, just to keep things stable, you might consider increasing your dampening property as well. Now in this case, let's say we can go ahead and use the same value as our dampening parameter. So go ahead and set the tension to about 0.5. Now if I go ahead and set this to 0.5, you'll notice that we're going to get the same look. Now, what's the problem here? Well, the problem is that we did not select the influencer first before we added that value. So we have to specify the tension that we would like to affect. So I'll go ahead and select the self-influence here at the top underneath springs. Now, we'll go ahead and set our tension back to 0.5 and take a look. It has now changed the behavior of the spring controller. So now when we hit play, take a look at this. Now that looks very flexible, doesn't it? Looks lifelike. How cool is that? And again, this did not take much time at all. It's just a matter of adding the spring controller and adjusting a few properties. Sweet. So in this lesson, we learned how we can save time when animating follow through and overlap by using this really cool dynamic system in 3ds Max of our turret. With just a few expressions and the spring controller, we were able to create a really nice looking idle. Now to take this a step further, we can go ahead and convert all of this procedural movement to keyframe data. That way we can start to tweak it even further to our liking. Let's say if we don't quite like the result we see and we want to change the idle somehow. Perhaps we want the turret to lift up a little bit higher for a certain period of time and then drop. Well, what we could do is just go ahead and convert the movement back to keyframe data and adjust our keys. And voila, we're good to go. So let me go ahead and show you how to bake animation here in the software. Let's go ahead and start with our expressions. So I'll go ahead and start with the swivel control. I'll head over to our position controller. Let's go ahead and find the z-axis. And I'd first like to show you that, again, we cannot move in the z-axis any longer because it's being fully controlled by, of course, the expression. But watch this. underneath our motion panel, if we were to go ahead and switch over to trajectories, this is where we would convert all of that movement to keyframe data. So take a look at our sample range. As right now, this shows us how many keyframes it will create, as well as the frame range it will create the keyframes within. So this is going to stop at frame 80, and it's going to create about 10 keyframes. That's probably not going to be ideal for this control. We're going to lose a lot of movement. Let's go ahead and test this out. I'll simply go ahead and click on collapse and take a look. Again, it stops at frame 80, and we've only created about 10 keyframes. So you can see the animation doesn't quite play back as it should. However, you'll notice that we no longer have an expression controller applied to that track. That's been cleared out, and we actually have a new controller, a fresh position list. But in this case, again, it's not going to do us too much good, right? So here's what we can do. Let's go ahead and undo back and jump back to trajectories. What we do here is first set our end time to our active time segment's end time, which is frame 200. And then we can start to increase our sample so that we create more keys to preserve the animation. If you really wanted to, you can create 200 keys. Just go ahead and type that value in. And when you do that, you'll notice that the entire animation will be preserved. But keep in mind, that's going to be a lot of keyframes to clean up, right? Let's go ahead and have a look. So with this set to 200, I'll also go ahead and uncheck rotation since we're only focused on position here. We'll now go ahead and click on collapse and take a look. There are our keys. So you'll notice that the animation is going to play back just fine, right? However, let's go ahead and have a close look at what we've done via the curve editor. So take a look at all of these keyframes. Now thankfully, 3ds Max has a really neat optimization tool to clean up a majority of these keys. Let's go ahead and have a look. So with our track selected, we can go ahead and jump to our curves menu, and from there we can go ahead and choose simplify curve. So here we have just one property, the threshold. As we start to increase this, that's going to remove more keys, so be very careful. If I were to go ahead and set this to about 10 or so and choose OK, it's going to clear out the entire animation. So chances are we'll want to stick with the default value or somewhere close to that value. I'll go back to simplify curve, and I'll set this to about 0.5. When we choose OK, take a look. Majority of our keys are now gone, and we're basically left with the keys that we absolutely need. So in no time at all, we have an optimized animation, and it has preserved the animation that we have started with. How cool is that? So we can do the same thing for our other controls. Going to the pitch control, we can go ahead and grab that and collapse rotation this time. Sweet. And then we'll go ahead and do some cleanup work. Now, if it wasn't for the Simplify Curves tool, we'd have to go in and manually start to delete keyframes. So that can be very tedious, right? Instead, we could just go ahead and highlight the controllers we'd like to apply the tool to. Simply go ahead and run it with a low threshold. And there you have it. You can see it's removed the keys that I had selected. I might go ahead and run this again just to clear out more keyframes. Fantastic. So there you have it. You can see that we're able to keep the animation while still being able to go in and make modifications if we need to. If we want to change any one of our key values, it's very easy to do that now. We can go ahead and jump to any one of these. I might go ahead and head over to View and turn on Interactive Update, grab a key, and start to kind of pull this up a bit, just to drop the turret's head down a bit more. Right now I'm tweaking the key on frame 89. So take a look, it was very easy to make this change. So it should look down just a little bit more. Fantastic. Alright, how cool is that? So you'd want to do the same thing for the cables control. So with that selected, let's go ahead and uncheck rotation. We'll go ahead and check position. The frame range looks good. Our sample rate looks good. Let's go ahead and choose collapse. So it's the same story here. Now, if we take a close look, what you'll see here is the trajectory that's created by this control. So do keep that in mind. If it looks like something has been broken, it's just the trajectory. And that's a really neat system here in 3ds Max. You can learn more about that in Volume 2 if you'd like. But what I'll now do is go ahead and clean up a lot of these keys. We'll go ahead and jump back to the curve editor. We'll head over to curves and choose simplify curve. Now, if you notice that your tracks aren't automatically selected, you might go to your show menu. Underneath auto expand, you can go ahead and turn on animated, and more importantly, underneath auto select, make sure that animated is checked so you can quickly get to the properties that you need to optimize. Go ahead and run the tool, and there you have it. In no time at all, we are left with the same animation that we started with and fewer keys. Nice. So again, in this lesson, we learned how to bake animation. We also learned we learned how to work with the Create Key tool to quickly add moving holds. Now, this is really neat stuff. I think you'll find that very useful, so do get familiar with that tool. And then we learned the benefit of working with selection sets and how they can be used to isolate objects for keying. We learned about animation layers and how we can use them to add on top of our animations non-destructively. And then to conclude the course, we learned how to automate movement with expressions and with the really neat spring controller to create dynamic effects. So here's what I'd like you to do. I'd like you to go in and use a few expressions to create a different type of idle for the turret. And then feel free to work with the spring controller as well. If you don't want to use it on the cable, perhaps you might try it on, let's say, the swivel control. Keep in mind, it affects the position of your object. So if an object is designed to rotate only, chances are you don't want to use the spring controller on it. But you can get some really fun results with it, and it can help you save a lot of time. We actually use it in Introduction to 3ds Max on the mech that we rig and animate in that series. So if you'd like to learn more about it, you can go ahead and have a look at that course as well. But again, that's your challenge. I'd like you to go ahead and use the tools that we have covered creatively, because that's how you'll truly start to understand them and have fun with them as well. And with that said, that's going to conclude this lesson. Thanks for